And when we do put forth that effort, when we really try to fathom what we've been given and why we've been given it by Him, He blesses that. He rewards that in ways that allow us to feel it even more deeply still. Hello, friends. Welcome. I'm Matthew Pilling, Chief Overthinker with a Pilling Perspective. This is the 12th and final video in our gratitude series, and today we're going to overthink a little bit about gratitude and our relationship with God. I hope as we've gone through some of the ideas that we've gone through that maybe this idea has already been sparked a little bit in your mind and in your heart. We've talked a lot about how deepening our gratitude can very strongly improve our connection to people. And I think the most important connection we can have is our connection with God, but it's also the most ambiguous sometimes. God is something that's foreign. We live in a world that is often godless, even though He's everywhere and in everything. We live in a world that is often godless, and so feeling connected to Him in an environment that is not always naturally Him can be very difficult to navigate. But there are two things I want to discuss in this concept. One is the idea that the way that we show gratitude to other people, to His other children, very directly reflects how we love Him. He in the scriptures told us that if we do it unto the least of these, our brethren, it's like we're doing it unto Him. And so I think as we learn to understand other people's offerings for us and accept the message of love that they're giving us in those offerings and treat them differently because of it and be more committed to them because of it, we are making an offering in that fashion to God as well. There is definitely something that happens as we deepen our gratitude and we deepen our soul in the process, that it gives us greater capacity for feeling God. Mr. Rogers actually said, "I believe that appreciation is a holy thing, that when we look for what's best in a person we happen to be with at the moment, we're doing what God does all the time. So in loving and appreciating our neighbor, we're participating in something sacred." And I think there's a lot of power in that. There's huge power in the idea of making our gratitude something sacred. Because then every time that we share gratitude genuinely with other people, we are pulling ourselves into a sacred realm and are allowed to feel things that belong to that sacred realm. But we're also imparting that to other people and helping share that with other people. The second reason I think that all of this matters is because God has given us so much. He has given us everything. I have talked a ton in these videos about the idea of understanding the cost of what we've been given and then understanding the message behind them, behind the offerings that we're being given. And when we focus on that, we will see what we're being given differently. It will be less about the actual gift itself and a lot more about the giver. And when we consider what God has given us, when we consider everything that we depend on Him for, that He so freely gives to us, when we consider especially that we do live in a fallen and broken world, but that He has given everything necessary to redeem us from this fallen and broken world. And the message that that communicates I mean, John told us, for God so loved us that he gave his only begotten Son. When we consider the cost of what he's given us and the message that he's sending because of it, that he loves us, it can deepen our relationship with him in ways that nothing else can. And I know gratitude is already a very God-based thing, a very religion-based thing for a lot of people, that we spend time in worship, we spend time praising God because of how great and how good he is. But just like I've said, counting our blessings, counting our physical possessions can be simply an accounting that can lead to either a scarcity mentality or a comparison game. When we list the blessings we receive from God, if we're taking those blessings for granted, if we're listing them and saying, yes, I'm grateful for them, but we're not putting any real effort into feeling that feeling before we offer it up to the all-knowing God, he knows it. He feels it. He doesn't necessarily receive those offerings in the same way that he receives an offering where we have put forth that effort. And when we do put forth that effort, when we really try to fathom what we've been given and why we've been given it by him, he blesses that. He rewards that in ways that allow us to feel it even more deeply still. I had a teacher in a religious class when I was in high school, and I was in high school back when Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter had just become popular video games. And he one day, it was not the lesson he came in with plans to teach, but he spent some time talking about those games and saying he would never allow them in his home, which to a teenage kid seemed very extreme. They're just video games. Why does that matter? But he very strongly said, if it is the blood of Christ that purchased us in a very violent act, if his suffering is what purchased us, then his enemy is going to do everything he can to make violence seem normal to us, to make blood seem worthless to us, to numb us to violence and blood by including it in our entertainment as much as possible, and by causing us to almost get to a point where we worship that instead of worshiping him. And the way he said it was more eloquent than that. But he ruined a lot of video games and movies and entertainment for me, because I saw that in so many things. It put me in a spot where I couldn't watch meaningless violence in movies and not come back to that thought that the whole purpose of it being in those movies was calculated to cause me to not be as affected by Christ's death, by his crucifixion, by his atonement as I could be. I've talked in other videos about our feeling sensors being numb. Here is an area where we can control that a little bit, where if we will lighten up our violent diet, if we will lessen the consumption of violence in our lives, and start to really consider, what was that moment really like for him? He was a God, but he was a God who chose to step down and live in a mortal experience. And the pain that he suffered on behalf of you and behalf of me was very, very real. And when we get into understanding what that means and why he paid that price, it will change our commitments to Him. It will deepen our relationship with Him. I hope this makes sense. I hope as we've shared all of these ideas that there has been a joy that's come into your life as you've considered some new perspectives, as you've considered some thoughts about how to make your gratitude more meaningful, not so that others will see it and say, boy, they give great thanks, but so that in becoming more grateful, more deeply grateful, you have been able to connect with things that maybe you haven't connected with before. And you've been able, in connecting with those things, to feel love in a way that maybe you haven't felt it before. He loves you. He wants for you to be happy. And gratitude is the quickest path to that. Please feel free to share this with those who need to hear it. Please feel free to comment here what you have learned and what your experience has been in considering some of these new perspectives. Like the channel, share it, subscribe it. Thank you for being here.